Hello, everybody. My name is June,
My name's Elyas.
and this is a podcast geared towards University of Michigan transfer students. This episode is going to be about housing. So, something we felt we wanted to talk about of like the overarching part of housing is the transition that a lot of us go through when moving to a new city, especially when maybe you've never lived anywhere but your parents' house before. And so it can be really hard to make that adjustment. So I have a little story about how I experienced transferring to Ann Arbor. I grew up in Grand Rapids my whole life. And when I moved to Ann Arbor, I didn't know anybody. And I also am a non-traditional student, so I'm a little bit older as well. So many of my classmates in undergrad were 19 years old and I was 26. So there was also, it seemed to me like a social gap there that I really didn't know how to fill. And I also, I didn't know anything about Ann Arbor. I didn't know how expensive it is. I didn't know anything about the different neighborhoods. And so, this is kind of the inspiration for this episode, is hoping that after you listen to this, you'll have a little bit better understanding of what it means to move into a new place, have roommates, and give you a little overview too of the different areas of Ann Arbor and what they do.
Yeah, like I think at the end of the day, like if you move in from a different part of the state or a different state entirely, or even just like 20 minutes, like there's still a lot of big changes that are happening that you kind of don't realize until like you're already kind of thrown in the middle of it. So I think like either way, like it's going to be a bit difficult, and kind of learning how to like deal with those difficulties as they come is part of like that on campus like experience.
Definitely. Also, the thing is, when you move into a place for the first time, after having lived in your hometown or lived with your parents or both, the importance of picking the right roommates, because most of us aren't going to be able to afford to live on our own, right? So in fact, a lot of us end up having to share a room, not even just an apartment or house, but share a room. As
That
Elias
is
has
not my
had a
bed. That is my roommate's bed
right.
behind me.
And so that can be really challenging. And when you just move in with strangers, which is probably going to happen at some point in your college career, it can be really hard to know what direction it's going to go. I've had some really good roommates in the past, and I've had some really bad roommates. The first time I ever moved out of my parents' house, I lived in a 5-bedroom house. And at one point, there were 11 people living in this house.
Wow, that's a lot. Oh,
And some of them weren't on the lease. Many of them were not paying rent. There was a lot of partying going on, which, like, people party, that's okay. But, you know, I often had to draw the line and say, like, this is too much. I need to be able to sleep. I need to be secure in my own home. We
yeah,
also often had so many people over and left the door unlocked, and I didn't always feel even safe in
yeah,
my own home. And while that experience was really, really challenging for me as an 18-year-old, it also really helped me feel like, wow, okay, I know what I'm looking for now in a living situation, and the kind of people that I need around me and the kind of people I don't want around me. And so I just want to bring up that if you're moving into a new place, or if you do have options, vet your roommates a little bit, talk to
yeah,
them, maybe get coffee with them beforehand. Because once you sign the lease, it can be really, really challenging to get out if things go south. So just keep that in mind. I know that another little thing I'd like to I'd like to emphasize is most people do not need puppies in college.
Yeah.
Elias experienced this directly.
Yeah. Like, I mean, um, during the quarantine, like my girlfriend at the time, we had a little tiny white Pomeranian, cute as hell. But oh my god, was he a handful? Like I think it comes down like it kind of comes down to where are you at your in your life, really? Like if you have the time to dedicate to an animal, which is a lot of time that you need to dedicate to that animal, then okay. Like some people can do that. Some people have that time. Some people have that commitment. But if you can't, or if you don't have that, don't do it. It's a lot. It's like, mind you, we had him during like the summer in the middle of the quarantine, so we're not doing much. So like uh you kind of have more time to like spend. But I know now, like I'm so busy all the time, I can never do that. Um, so yeah, like if you're gonna get a pet in college, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And I think also make sure that you talk to your roommates about it so that they understand, like they have a clear understanding of like what, um, excuse me, what they're getting into and kind of like what you are going to be doing to like have like right now my one of my roommates has a cat, and like the cat is like no hassle whatsoever. Like I walk out and occasionally she's there and like meows, and like that's like the most that like I have to deal with her. So like he does a really good job of looking after her. But like my cat that I have at like my parents' house is a handful, and I know that like I wanted to bring him, but I'm like I don't have the time to really deal with him, like clean up after him, and like you know he's an old cat, so there's all these problems. So it's like I realize that like I don't have the time to deal with that right now. So um yeah, it's about having these conversations with your roommates. Like these are like whether you know them or not going into it. These are people that you're going to have uh, a level of, I don't know if intimacy is the right word, but like I guess that kind of works. Um,
Yeah.
with that, like you're not going to have with other people. Like you have to see them every day for the most part. You have to interact with them every day. You have to
Share
share
space.
most, like not just space, but just things like dishes, like that seems like such a simple thing, like dishes, but like that means that if you have like a big cooking night and you're using a whole bunch of dishes and a whole bunch of like pots and pans and stuff, and they want to make something, you need to clean your stuff so that they can use it, or at the very least have an
Right.
agreement. Yeah.
Right. Um, yeah, it really comes down to taking responsibility for your stuff. And I know people like to think, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. Me and my best friend are going to move in together, and like my best friend is going to be, just because somebody is your best friend does not mean they're going to be a great roommate.
Exactly.
And actually, I think sometimes having a boundary between your personal life and your living space can be really healthy,
Yeah.
especially Elias and I were just chatting about how we both got broken up with during
Yeah.
the pandemic, um, because in a large part because there wasn't enough space happening within a living situation. The pandemic kind of pushed people together in ways that were very abrupt, that we weren't really expecting it, and you try to make it work, but ultimately, um, I think I needed more boundaries, and I can't speak for Elias, but I will say that it makes you wonder, okay, what could have been different if the pandemic wouldn't have happened? But you want to be able to have people who are going to stick with you through thick and thin, not just in relationship, but roommate wise too,
Yeah.
who are going to be able to get through this with you. We're all kind of stuck together and have been stuck together for, the last 6 months now. Sometimes even in your case, Elias, like sharing a literal bedroom with
Yeah.
somebody while you have to sit on your computer at your desk all day, because everything's online now.
Yeah.
And just the importance really of of finding good fits for living situations. And when, even if it's a great fit, even if it's your best friend, even if it's your partner, even if it's whoever, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
And I think like kind of going off that, like, I know that right now it's a bit late for people who are kind of, going into new housing situations because most of that's already happened. But for like down the road, I think one thing that like I've definitely realized from like quarantine, um, is like when my partner and I were living together, um, during COVID, uh, when you share that much proximity with somebody, and you don't have that separation of like, oh, I'm going to go down to my friend's place, or I'm going to go out to this party or whatever, because none of that stuff's happening anymore. Um,
Yep.
you have new problems that start to arise that like don't happen in normal situations. And that goes with whether or not, like, whether you're like in a relationship or your friends or whatever. Like when I got into my housing situation originally, I got in with like two really, really close friends. And for the entirety of it, it was really good. Like the guy that I'm sharing a room with now, like he's the only person that like I've shared a room with. And like we did last year and we aren't this year. And like we'll probably continue to do this for the foreseeable future because we just so happen to mesh really well. And just like one of those uh, like really, serendipitous type of things. Like we're really close friends, but like we also just have those personalities that gel well, but that doesn't always happen. Like during COVID, like my partner and I got into a big fight with my friend who like we were also like sharing an apartment with. And now, mind you, this is like someone that like the three of us have like, like known each other for years, been very close friends for years. Um, all three of us have lived together without the other at some point. Um, up until like COVID, but just because of being like together for so long, like we end up getting to like a screaming match with each other over like dishes and stuff and like cleaning up and
Yep.
like just like because we didn't have that conversation going into the quarantine of like what our expectations were. Like they say that like the key to a healthy relationship is communication. I think that goes with whether or not you're like romantically like involved or you're just like living together. Like you have to be talking these things through. Um, like I've seen so many times like two people kind of like are living together like as roommates and someone has a problem with the way that someone else is doing something and they just don't say anything. They just kind of keep it to themselves and then just kind of like move along. And then it just builds and builds and builds. And that's what happened with us.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, everything's like me and my relationship with like that friend who I was like living with, like we're good. We're like on good terms. We kind of like we talked it out while we were living together and we figured something else out to like write out the rest of like our lease. But um, it's only because we had that conversation. And if we probably pushed it off like to like any longer, we probably wouldn't have like gotten to that like that conclusion, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think the open communication is key, and like I feel like, okay, here we are, we're stating the obvious, but the
Yeah.
reality is that we've I've certainly been in multiple living situations where I could know that I need to set boundaries. I could know that there needs to
Mm-hmm.
be conversations that happen, but it doesn't happen. Um, and so this is just me, me and Elyas giving you the advice of make sure it happens.
Yeah, a hundred
It can be
percent.
awkward. It can be super awkward sometimes having these conversations. But what's even more awkward is the living situation completely turning into a
Mm-hmm.
dumpster fire.
Oh yeah.
So have the awkward conversation and save yourself the pain of the passive aggressiveness, the frustration, the potentially like, I need to get out of this house because this is not going to work, broken up friendships, broken relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's really no need to let it get that far. And yes, please learn from my mistakes. Okay.
Yeah. And I think like,
I'm telling you, it ain't worth it. Like just do it. And
yeah.
if one of your roommates engages you in one of these conversations, I know it can be really hard to listen, but like do your best to be open to that criticism,
Hmm.
and open to having that conversation, because I know that that happens too. Nobody wants to hear like, hey, I really need you to take, pick up after yourself.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be your mom, and nobody wants to be mommed.
Hmm.
So like do your best to not let it get there. But if the conversation has to happen, let it happen, for to save yourself the pain of that unfolding later on.
Like, I think as a general rule of thumb, you're probably doing something that irritates your roommates. um, so
Probably, yes.
yeah, like don't take it personally. Like you're
Right.
sharing, especially like if you're in college, odds are like, especially here in Ann Arbor where rent is stupid expensive. Like I'm living on North Campus, and we can get into like talking about like the different crazy levels of like prices that some of these apartments have like around like the city. But here in North Campus, where like rent is supposed to be like pretty like on the like lower end, and like we're on like the literal border of the city, we're still paying a lot for a very small apartment. So you're sharing a room with
Yes.
the like even if you're not sharing a room, you're still sharing like a very small space with like multiple people. It's natural. You're going to have things that are gonna bother you about like your roommates, and your roommates are gonna have things that bother them about you. And it's about trying not to take it personally, and just recognizing that like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that like this was a problem for you. I'll try my best to like do better in this regard. And I think like just
Right.
accepting that is the most important thing. But I think also realizing that sometimes you're gonna have roommates that are just like terrible people, or terrible roommates or whatever. Like this didn't happen to me, but this happened to my one of the roommates my roommate had like a few years back was just an awful person. Like just really just a terrible guy. Like I don't know how else to put it. Um and they had a conversation with him, and like, hey, look, um the dude could afford it. And so like, hey, I think we need you to leave, or we need to figure something out. And so he left. Um, and of course, not everybody's gonna be able to like do that because rent is very expensive. Um, but even having the conversation with like the people you're living with now, in anticipation for the next lease that you're gonna sign, if you don't like the people you're living with and you have an option not to live with them, having that conversation can be super important. And saying I'm like, hey, we are not going to be living together in the future. Or even if you like them, but it like maybe they are your friend, they're your best friend, but you're realizing that living with them is ruining your friendship. Sitting down with them and saying like, hey, I don't think we should be living together. You need to have those conversations.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So switching gears here a little bit, I know you just kind of went into North Campus,
Yeah.
which is where you live. If I know for me, again, moving to Ann Arbor, I didn't know anything about Ann Arbor. I didn't really know anything
Mm-hmm.
about the different neighborhoods. So we're just going to do a quick, brief, like different sides of town of Ann Arbor and what
Yes.
they have to offer. Since you brought up North Campus, if you want to just take a moment to talk about your experience living on North Campus, that would be great.
Yeah. So North Campus is kind of interesting because it's part of U of M, but also doesn't really feel like it's part of U of M. It kind of feels like it's its own thing. Like North Campus is really like home to like the engineering students mostly, but then there's also like Stamps, which is like the School of Art. There's a lot of design people up there, a lot of like computer science people. So I know at least for me, like so my both my roommates are nuclear engineering uh, master's students. So I didn't really care where we lived. And so they were like, well, we want to live close to North Campus so we can just kind of grab a blue bus down. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine with me because we live pretty close to the Park and Ride, which is like the big bus system that kind of connects Ann Arbor. And so we found like a place that was close to a blue bus station and close to a Park and Ride point. Uh, and what I found is that living on North Campus is a lot quieter because it doesn't really, like I said, it doesn't really feel like it's part of Ann Arbor, but it also isn't too far away. It kind of feels almost like the suburbs in a sense. If Ann Arbor has that in this side of the city. But it's a nice quiet place. If you love the city life and you love um, kind of always being in like a happening spot, it probably isn't the right spot for you. But if you are trying to live somewhere on a budget, then you can find some pretty inexpensive stuff like up here.
Right. And I think that that's partly because it's a little further away, right, from the
Yeah.
main campus. How, if you were to drive from your apartment to Central Campus, how long would you say that drive is?
So the drive isn't the bad part. It's like parking.
Parking. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. Like, um, I want to say, mind you, it's a little bit different because of specifically where I live. So I live really close to Getty's right now, and I can just hop
Mm.
on Getty's Road, and I can be in the city in, I want to say, like 10 minutes, if that. Probably less than that, actually. It depends on like traffic. Usually going to the city is a lot faster than coming back, especially in rush hour. But when I was living on Plymouth Road, that took forever just because of all of the street lights, all the traffic, all the congestion. Um, so, but even with that, it was probably no more than like 12-ish minutes going into the city. But then parking is the big deal. Is like finding street parking is near impossible most days.
Yeah.
And you have to usually park in a parking structure or a lot, and parking, paying, all that stuff takes time. So like you're looking at like a decent commute of like probably like 15 minutes at the end of the day
Yeah.
either way.
Yeah. And I know that partly goes into the cost, or like with North Campus being a little bit cheaper because
Mm-hmm.
it isn't, in the center of downtown where you could
Yeah.
just like walk. I mean, you could walk, but it would certainly take you a long time. Um, I lived on the Old West Side when
Mm-hmm.
I was living in Ann Arbor. And similarly to North Campus, it's not very like hustle bustle. It's more of a family area, actually. Both of my neighbors on either side of me were like just families with
Mm-hmm.
kids, um, you know, and I kind of loved that. I know I had a classmate who said that she lived more like pretty much on campus, and she had basically frat houses on either side of her house. And she said it was a nightmare because, they would just party all night, and no matter what she was doing or to do, keep her house kind of quiet and able to study or do whatever, there's only so much you can do if both houses on either side of you are absolutely blasting dubstep, you know?
Yeah.
So, or screaming and playing beer pong in their front lawn.
Oh yeah.
Which, power to you, whatever. But I know for me, living on the Old West Side, being a little more separate from that was really good for me. It also created a little bit of a separation from school and like home, where I felt like, okay, this is my like little neighborhood. There's lots and lots of parks on the Old West Side. So there was plenty of places for me to just go for walks and, kind of just be in a good headspace for me personally. It is a little bit farther away. I would say too, it would only take maybe 5 minutes for me to drive from my house to
Right.
like say East Quad, but then you're finding parking, you're paying for which, it's a couple bucks here or there, but like, yeah, but if you're driving like almost every day of the week, all of a sudden you're spending like $50 a month on
Exactly.
parking. So that's something you got to keep in mind. So I also had my bike. I would ride my bike a lot, from the Old West Side to Central Campus. I would say it would take like 7 to 10 minutes, depending on traffic. And that was really nice. Walking, it was like a 20 to 30 minute walk, from my house to like walking in the door of a classroom.
Right.
And so that's something to keep in mind. I haven't lived on other sides of town. I don't know as much about them, but another popular area is Carytown, which is on the north side of Ann Arbor. That's a pretty well-known spot. It's pretty close to campus. It's not quite on campus, but it's very close. There's lots of bars and restaurants. There's shops. That's where the Ann Arbor Farmers Market takes place,
Yep.
which is pretty poppin'. And
There's a lot of
also,
student housing, so most of the people like living in that
yeah,
area are students. So
yeah,
if you want
definitely.
that dynamic of like being around like, areas where like there's a lot of parties and a lot of like events happening, and like that's probably like more up your alley. And while it's more expensive, it's definitely a more expensive area to live. You're not paying the crazy amounts of money you're paying to like live like on like the east side and like central like campus. Like you can kind of get the best of both worlds in a little bit.
Yeah, and actually, there's a few different co-ops over there in Carytown, and as you said, Elias, like it's a lot more student housing versus, like, as I said, on the Old West Side, there's more families.
Yeah.
So it could be a good spot. Also, just a little shout out to Detroit Filling Station, which is like a vegan restaurant in Carytown. There's a lot of good restaurants in Ann Arbor, but I just really kind of love that they are like a fully vegan restaurant, and they had these like cauliflower hot wing things
Right.
that were like pretty delicious. So if
That's
you're a vegan or
interesting.
vegetarian, I would definitely, head to Carytown and try out Detroit Filling Station. Um, and then finally, there's also South Main. Um, that's obviously on the south side. It's closer to the big house.
Hmm.
There's more chain restaurants over there. Also, a lot of student housing. It's closer to Meyer and places like
Yeah.
that. But it is a little further away. And then the east side the east side of Ann Arbor is where Central Campus is.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the most expensive. There's going to be the most frats and sororities, but you're also going to be able to pretty much like walk out your front door
And
into
be
your
anywhere.
class.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like be right there where everything is happening. So, for people who are really looking for that experience, the East Side could be good. And if you can afford it, I mean, you know
Yeah.
do what's right for you. Each side of town really has different things to offer, and there's also Ipsy, which is obviously like maybe a 20-ish minute drive away from Ann Arbor, um, but it's cheaper to live over there, and some people are cool with living in Ipsy.
Yeah. One of the things just to kind of keep in mind, especially when you're looking at like stuff in East Side versus stuff out in like North Campus or like somewhere it's less expensive, is just make sure you keep an eye on like what the rate is, because somewhere on North Campus will usually charge you per unit. So like for the actual apartment itself, you'll be maybe paying like, I don't know, $1,500 or something like that. But somewhere like on the East Side, they'll often charge you per person, and they'll mark it as like $1,500 for like a 2-bedroom apartment. And you at first glance are like, oh, that's the same price as somewhere on like North Campus. But it's about keeping your eye out to see that like, oh no, it's really a like $3,000 to like $4,000 apartment, and they're just listing it as this to try to like reel you in.
Right,
Yeah.
definitely. I've seen a lot of that too when I first was coming to Ann Arbor, which I just want to say to landlords can be really frustrating. And I have heard a lot of horror stories about landlords in Ann Arbor, because in a lot of ways they can kind of prey on young
Of course.
students who have never rented before, so not only, are they charging you a ton of money, but they also might not be very responsive because they might assume like, what's this little 19-year-old going to do about it,
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
just remember that you do have rights, um, and that if you need to stand up for yourself, you can. There are rules that landlords need to follow, and standards to living situations, and you uh, yeah, you have the right to say, hey, I need a home that's secure, that isn't falling, I don't want a roof caving in on my head,
Which has
if
happened to my old
maintenance.
roommates.
Yeah, it's happened to me too with bad
Yeah.
landlords. And then they come and they do a botched job putting it together, and it's a perpetual problem. So just remember to look out for that. So when you are on that hunt, just keep in mind that landlords, there's some really great ones, but there's also some bad ones. And advocate for yourself. Ask the hard questions when you're going into those housing situations. Talk to people who already live there. If you can
Hmm.
find somebody who lives there and you can say, hey, what's your landlord like? um, do they respond to your calls?
Yeah,
Things like that. It can bring you a long way, because they'll reel you in with a price that sounds good, and then after you sign the lease, you're never going to hear from them again, even though your
exactly.
toilet doesn't work, or so these things that happen. So just be on the lookout for yourself. If it's too good to be true, really,
Usually
like,
is.
yeah, like, really really think about it, because ultimately, if you have a comfortable living situation, you're going to have a better transition. You're going to be able to focus on school more, because if you can't even feel comfortable in your own home, it's going to be hard, when you don't have that foundation. So
Yeah.
so really just make sure you're looking out for yourself.
Yeah. It's at the end of the day, just make sure you have the living situation that's going to be the best for what you need.
Definitely.
I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Stay tuned for more content dedicated to UMich students, either new or returning. I feel like with this, we can all kind of learn something that we didn't know about before. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Bye.